As many as you guys know, over the years I've been writing in a Google Docs document possible ideas for me to tackle. I have pretty much gone through all of them while also adding new ones. But ever since I started uploading God of War videos, I've had one video idea that remains to be tackled: the mystery of the god Apollo. Ever since the first God of War game came out, there have been multiple, and I mean multiple mentions of Apollo. Whether it be as a Blades of Chaos skill, a whole island dedicated to him, and even a playable item in God of War 3. All of these mentions are proof that Apollo at least exists in the God of War universe. Yet, Kratos has never met him. At the end of God of War 2, I thought we would finally meet Apollo in God of War 3. After all, this was the Greek version of a Ragnarok battle, so I assumed that Zeus would bring every single god of Olympus against Kratos. But as many of you know, Apollo is nowhere to be found. So, what happened to him? Here I'm gonna have to stop and briefly explain something. Some of you might have the urge to comment that Apollo was indeed killed by Kratos in God of War 3. It's just the developers chose to call him by his other name, Helios. And I can see why many think this is the case. At first glance, Helios and Apollo seem like the same character. Helios is the god of the sun and Apollo is the god of light. Two things that sound very similar. But canonically speaking, Helios and Apollo are two different characters. The title of God of Light can be interpreted more as God of Enlightenment, meaning that Apollo was in charge of things such as music, dance, and prophecy, while Helios controlled the sun. If you look at their family tree, you will even see some striking differences. The most obvious one being that Helios is a full-blooded Titan, while Apollo belongs to the second generation of gods. So, now that we know that these are two different characters, I think it's fair to ask, who is Apollo? Is it possible Kratos has met him before? I never thought I would say this, but I believe Kratos has indeed met Apollo before, even if he wasn't aware of it. For this, we're gonna have to take a look at the God of War comics. No, not these ones, but these ones. In these comics, we get a look at a younger Kratos. A Kratos who's on a mission to retrieve the ambrosia of Asclepius to heal his daughter. Here, Kratos fights against other mortals who have a similar mission. And of course, behind all of this fighting are the gods of Olympus. If you're a God of War fan, I truly recommend these comics. The only thing that's kinda meh, it's the art style, because sometimes it kinda looks AI generated. But overall, it's an interesting story that not a lot of God of War fans have read. Which is why I think no one has ever talked about the character I'm gonna be talking about today. So, let's do it. Right after Lysandra gives birth to Calliope, both Kratos and Lysandra notice that she was born with pretty much the plague. This is bad news for Kratos and Lysandra because Spartan law dictates that any weak or sick child shall be cast from Mount Taygetus. Kratos, being an extemporary Spartan, was devastated but understood what had to be done. But before this happened, the midwife informed Kratos and Lysandra that a long time ago she heard a healer talking about Asclepius Ambrosia. Kratos without hesitation paid this healer a visit. But this is where things started to get odd, even if Kratos didn't notice it. From the very start, the healer interrupted Kratos' sentence by pretty much telling him, "Don't bother explaining why you're here, I already know." This already should raise a red flag. Mere mortals don't have these prophetic powers, unless they're oracles. But the healer also seems to know the gods of Olympus on a personal level, because when Kratos leaves, the healer tells him a chilling sentence. He says, "No, my poor foolish son, it is the gods whom you should fear." Once again, this seems to indicate that the healer knows the gods of Olympus on a personal level, almost as if he lived with them on Mount Olympus. But the kicker here is that this healer gives Kratos a brand new power, probably the first power he ever received, the Flame of Apollo. Meaning that this guy is none other than Apollo himself. Well, this is disputed. I checked the God of War wiki page, and the people who wrote this page seem to think that this was Zeus in disguise. You know, the gravedigger. The biggest hint being that he refers to Kratos as my poor foolish son. But I personally never found this to be conclusive evidence, because if it was, Kratos would have done a double take. Excuse me, my poor foolish what? Dad? No, instead I think this is just another case of gods referring to all of their mortal subjects as their sons and daughters, something we see throughout many myths and religions. This is why Kratos doesn't think twice about it and continues with his mission. The other odd detail that tells me this isn't Zeus is the line, "It is the gods whom you should fear." If this was Zeus, this line would come across as more threatening. But instead, he comes across as being worried about Kratos. Very similar to how Athena treated Kratos before she died.
Perhaps it is a vision best left unchanged. There is more to this than you know. Please.
But the biggest detail that tells me this isn't Zeus is his title, the Healer. Do you know which god of Olympus was in charge of healing the sick? Well, Asclepius was one of them. But his father Apollo was the other one, not Zeus. Also, I shouldn't have to remind you guys of this, but the only time Kratos received godly or titan powers was when those very same gods and titans were gracious enough to give it to him. Poseidon gave him some of his powers, Zeus gave him his thunderbolt, Hades given an army of souls, and even Kratos used a Zordon hologram to give him some of his powers. There has never been a case where a god gave Kratos another god's power. It has always been given to him by the same god or taken from them. So using this logic, we can conclude that Apollo gave Kratos the Flame of Apollo, a flame that he used to find his way to Asclepius Ambrosia, as well as nuking a primordial being from existence. The topic of Apollo is still shrouded in mystery. It's one of those gods that I think almost made it into the series, but due to lack of funds or lack of time, the team just didn't get around to including him in the roster. With all of this lack of information, I would understand if you find these proofs unconvincing. But here's the thing, if the God of War wiki page is correct, and this is Zeus in disguise, we have to ask ourselves something very important. How did Zeus get a hold of Apollo's power? This question is important because there's only one time we've seen Zeus take another god's power, and it wasn't very pretty.
Even now, as you draw your last breath, you continue to defy me?
That's right, if you found this video about Apollo entertaining, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because next week, I'm gonna be uploading part 2. I understand this video was kinda short. I originally was going to include part 2 in it, but the video was getting too crowded. So I thought it was best to make part 1 about who Apollo was, and part 2 about what might have happened to him. In the meantime, just mull it over. Is it possible that one of the most mysterious characters in the series was staring at us the entire time? Or do you still think we haven't met Apollo? Whatever your thoughts and theories are, make sure to leave them in the comments section below. As always, I want to thank all of my members for supporting the channel monthly. I can't tell you how much your support means to me. YouTube is not the most reliable place to work at, so having fans like you who go the extra mile is really needed, and for that, I thank you all. So here, let me personally kiss a couple of yous. Kiss Burst Writers, Michael T, Deke Glack Laszlo, Big Bear. This is a weird ending. I love you guys. Thank you for supporting the channel. Also, I want to thank everyone who likes and shares my videos. I know it doesn't seem like much, but trust me, it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching, and remember, go forth in the name of Olympus.